Main things to discuss when we're talking about the physical impact of trauma and just trauma in general, as Anna highlighted, please, 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 my loves, be mindful of your mind and your body, your thoughts and your emotions as we are going into these discussions. You are never going to hurt my feelings or Anna's feelings by putting your needs first and just stepping out of that room. In fact, I know that Anna would agree with me is that we would encourage you to do so. And Tamara, I do see your hand, but if it's a question, we'll try and save that to the end. And no worries if it was an accident. I know that happens too. But again, please don't feel like this is your one and only time to ask these questions. If you feel that overload, if you feel that activation, if you feel that trigger, please just take some time for yourself. Take some deep breaths, step out of the room if you would need to. This will be posted on Spotify, so you can listen to this at your leisure once it's uploaded. And again, please feel free to reach out with any additional questions. But I just want to make sure that we are all comfortable, we're all safe, and we are all respected during this conversation. And I feel very passionately about that, so I will ensure that we keep those ethos intact as we're having this discussion. So I'm going to try and separate this topic into three primary categories, and then we can kind of do a little bit of it, maybe 7 to 10 minutes of discussion on each. So those categories are going to be split into initial physical trauma. And again, I'll be using examples to highlight what I mean. So initial physical trauma. These are going to be our things like hospitalizations after car accidents, any outward physical damage that a body may sustain in response to a traumatic event. That's going to be our first category. Our second category is going to be those internal effects. So it's going to be the nervous system, the hormone response, how our body adjusts to that in the long term. And then 3, we're going to have those long-term medical conditions or long-term bodily conditions. And those can look like things like IBS, fibromyalgia, lupus, arthritis, chronic pain, chronic fatigue. Anything that our bodies are experiencing in the long run as a result of trauma. So we'll go ahead and get started with that initial physical trauma and how that can have an impact on us. Whether you experience physical trauma early in life, in childhood, or if you acquire it later on in adulthood, you more than likely will experience some physical side effects, either during the event, shortly after, or even weeks and months afterwards, because we all process trauma differently, right? Some people, we can go into dissociative states, and it's going to take us a very, very long time to fully process what goes on. And this can be your body's unique response to stress, or you can go into, again, a physically and medically observed state like shock, where you are quite literally not processing time and reality in the way that you normally would. It's why whenever we see, on TV programs and medical, documentaries and things like that, they're like, oh, they're in shock, get them a blanket, What they're really doing and what they're really saying in those moments is their nervous system is in a state of shock. We need to calm their nervous system, and we need to do it gently and slowly so that is not an abrupt end to a very, very, very intense bodily sensation. Is that making sense? Maybe just by a show of emojis? Perfect. Thanks, guys. Awesome. And I'll do that periodically just to check in, because I know that in our previous masterclass, I was able to provide like brain areas to give you a little bit of an image, but this one is a little bit more difficult. So I'll check in with you guys to make sure that that knowledge and that recognition is there. So we've got that initial physical trauma, right? That initial physical trauma, let's think about the example of a car accident, or maybe someone who is coming home from war. They may have had a limb amputated. Maybe they had a traumatic brain injury. If you are someone who survived a violent assault, you may have deep lacerations, stab wounds, gunshot wounds. Anything like that, we can all term that as trauma. And so as a result of that, you may have a very, very long healing road ahead of you. You may have surgeries. You may have physical therapy. You might need to get medical devices to help your body function in a healthy way. And depending on the severity of your injuries and how long-term it is, it's going to affect your body in a few key areas. So first, we can talk about our brain, which again, we discussed at length in our previous one. So if that's a topic that interests you, I'm going to keep it nice and short, but just to give us some context as we're discussing. But really go back and listen to that one if that's something that you're curious about. But our amygdala, our hippocampus, and our prefrontal cortex are primarily what's going to be affected. Our amygdala, you can think A, it's going to be an alarm bell. So A for alarm bell, A for amygdala. Our hippocampus is going to be our memory. It's going to be our emotion. And our prefrontal cortex is going to be our logic centers. If you think about that traumatic event, let's again use the car accident example. If you had a very severe car accident and you are now dealing with the emotional and psychological effects of that trauma, every single time you are reminded of that, whether intentionally or not, you may have a firing of your amygdala. When that happens, your amygdala is telling your body, go into hyperdrive. Flood the body with cortisol, flood the body with norepinephrine, and flood the body with adrenaline. And whenever that happens, you can think about it as your body preparing you to fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. Those are our main 4 trauma responses. And again, I'm going to go into a little bit of a discussion on how those hormones affect us. So beginning with cortisol. Cortisol, let's think of it generically as our stress hormone. And if you know about cortisol and you know about the effects and the long-term effects that elevated cortisol levels can do to you, you might be surprised to know that cortisol on its own and in short bursts is actually an anti-inflammatory. Is that news to anyone? Maybe by a show of thumbs up that it's actually an anti-inflammatory? Yeah, yeah, for sure, for sure. And the reason I bring that up is because long-term, it actually has the opposite effects. And I'll get into that in a second, but again, I'm going to talk about why we need that anti-inflammatory and why cortisol is important. That amygdala alarm bells ring, and it sends signals to our body, we need to get into overdrive. So what that's going to do with the anti-inflammatory of cortisol, it's going to relax our body. It knows that we're about to engage in either maybe a physical alteration or need to exert our body to get away from this perceived danger. And it doesn't want us to get hurt in the process. So it's like, hey, short burst of cortisol, anti-inflammatory. I'm going to try and mitigate any adverse effects that this physical exertion is going to cause. That's it in short bursts, and that's whenever it's doing its function as it was designed to. However, when we have the long-term effects of cortisol, unfortunately, what ends up happening is the opposite. If our body is in a prolonged state of stress, which is very frequently what happens in almost all cases of trauma following the traumatic event, you are going to have increased muscle tension. You are going to have an increased heart rate, and that might feel like heart palpitations or heart racing. That can include your body having difficulty regulating a temperature. You know, that can be excessive sweating, or maybe you're getting chills, anything like that. And then again, additionally, that cortisol isn't doing the job as it was intended. And so that long-term cortisol exposure is actually going to lower lymphocyte production, which is in our immune system. If you think about that, and we think about that in the terms of our overall health, elevated stress levels causing physical damage to our body, we can think like, you know, in plain terms, let's use heart disease and lung disease, because our heart is a muscle. If we overwork it, if it's constantly racing, if it's constantly palpitating by that amygdala, constantly having that alarm bell rung, those muscles can start to tear. They can start to fatigue. They can start functioning in a way that is not beneficial to us, because our body was not meant to be under that much stress for that long of a period. Secondarily, same thing with our lungs. Our lungs, we're designed to have that, okay, I'm going to need to go on a 5K run, or if I'm really going to build up to a long marathon, I'm going to do that over a short period of time and build up to that long-term endurance. But again, if you just had that traumatic event and then you immediately hopped into running a marathon, your lungs are not going to be doing well. It's going to be that chronic inflammation over a long period of time, which unfortunately your cortisol levels simply were not designed to combat. They were designed to combat it in short bursts. So tracking back to that lymphocyte production, and again, that autoimmune element of it, whenever we go into fight or flight, our non-essential bodily systems actually shut down. So that can be things like our digestive system. It's why a lot of people who have trauma afterwards, who have trauma, tend to develop IBS afterwards, which is irritable bowel syndrome. So tongue-tied this evening. Irritable bowel syndrome, IBS. IBS is easier. Yes, thank you, Catherine. I'm also having an upside down smiley face in this moment. I think we'll just say IBS for clarity and for my Southern accent, not trying to make me feel tongue-tied. Yes, thank you, Raleigh. Appreciate the laughing face. So if you think about it in that way, it's a very physical response. That alarm bell rings, shuts down non-essential functions like digesting food. And if that's happening over a long period of time, of course, you are not going to be able to digest food in the way that you need to. This can present in diarrhea. This can present in constipation. This again might be chronic inflammation. It can be acid reflux. It can also present too as anxiety symptoms like an upset stomach or nausea, because again, your body is not designed to be under this amount of stress for this long term. It's very frequent that after a traumatic event, particularly in the wild, an animal will immediately go to the bathroom or might regurgitate as a stress response. This again gives you this example out in nature that it should be one time. It should be, a fox running away from a larger predator. It might be a rabbit running away from a coyote. And I know that I probably keep harping on about this, but it is in essence, our bodies simply were just not created to be under long-term stress. And this is again why, Anna, whenever you popped out for a little bit, what I was talking about was how, yes, we have the initial physical trauma. Yes, we have the nervous system response. But whenever we think about the larger picture and the larger physical impact on our health, we have to think about things like our demographics. In the United States, we eat quite a lot of processed food. If we make a few logical inferences, and again, additional to the fact that we drive everywhere as opposed to walking, those elements of heart disease and lung disease are going to get significantly worse. So we have the trauma, we have the already physical impact on our immune system, on our organ function, and on our brain, as we discussed last time. And then we add in our demographics, our outside influences, and it leads to, unfortunately, a very, very, very early death for a lot of trauma survivors. And again, I know that that is upsetting to hear. I understand that. And the reason that I am using those words and trying to use it directly and with kindness is that we need to be aware of it. We need to have a deep understanding of how it affects every single facet of our lives. If you continue again to make some logical inferences, emotionally, we may pull away after trauma, which can lead to isolation. If we are isolated, we sometimes are severely lacking in our endorphin production, which is another hormone. Our endorphin levels are always elevated when we are laughing, when we are having fun among friends, when we are getting physical touch and hugs. It's why, again, during COVID, there were so many studies coming out and discussing how touch-starved individuals were seeing very, very, very big physical effects from prolonged isolation. I believe, and I will try to find this study soon so I can discuss it in more detail, but I believe it was a Nordic country, maybe Denmark, maybe Sweden, but they were actually encouraging people to find roommates during the pandemic of like, hey, invite someone who is renting and ask them to stay in your house. Find those winter hibernation buddies that you might not have reached out to in a long time and invite them to stay in your home during COVID. You need this physical interaction. There have also been quite a number of wonderful studies regarding hugs and physical touch and intimacy and why humans need it. If you can have a 20 to 30 second hug or prolonged human contact, your body is going to be flooded with endorphins in the very best way. But unfortunately, if that is not happening, if you are isolating yourself, then on top of the nervous system, and again, I'll try to relate everything all back to each other. So on top of the brain being impaired in certain ways, on top of your nervous system, on top of your organ function, on top of the demographics that we discussed, we now have the abstract element of isolation and what that can do to our body. If we have no countermeasure in the way of dopamine, in the way of serotonin, in the way of endorphins, which are all very positive chemicals that create love and intimacy within our bodies, our bodies are really not having the opportunity to heal from that prolonged stress. We're under constant duress. And as a result of how those symptoms manifest, we now don't have any energy to try to build up those positive hormones. And again, it's why very frequently people have weight gain and or weight loss following a traumatic event. Maybe you tend to eat as a way to get that dopamine, as a way to comfort yourself. Maybe you're the opposite. Maybe that chronic fatigue and that pain and that emotional load is so painful that you can't even bring yourself to microwave something easy like a frozen dinner. It's just too much. And again, if you fall into either one of those categories, or more recently, we have another category, which is exercise as well. People using exercise as a way to feel like, hey, I have all this energy, I have all this built up anxiety and pressure. I am now going to go out of my way to go to the gym 7 days a week. I'm going to become addicted to staying busy, to continuing to push my body to be under physical stress. And it does genuinely become an addiction, much in the same way that overeating can become an addiction. And again, is this all kind of making sense, how we're having that cascading effect and how it can be linked back to physical trauma? Okay, great. Awesome. Oh yeah, Anna, I see your circle lighting up. You got something?
Nope. I was just
Okay.
gonna just say, yep, and then
Okay.
I'm like, I'm just gonna heart you.
Oh, okay, thanks. No, I just want to make sure because I was like, hey, Anna, again, wealth of information. So if you have anything, please feel free to
Nope.
jump in.
I'm right here with you. I'm like,
Mhm.
yep, check the box, check the box, check the box.
Yep, absolutely. Um, so I'm going to throw off some statistics for you guys, and this will kind of be I'll do a nice quick wrap up, and then we'll get ready for some questions and answers. But before we begin questions and answers, I wanted to give you guys some statistics to again normalize, destigmatize, and to inform. So it is estimated that about 90% of adults in the USA have experienced at least one traumatic event during their lifetime. Approximately 7 to 8% of all adults in the USA, which is about 1 in 13 people, will develop PTSD at some point in their lifetime. About 10% of women develop PTSD, and about 4% of men develop PTSD. And again, I'm going to list off just a couple of physical sensations to link back to anxiety / your body's stress response. So just a couple here. We've got heart palpitations or racing of your heart rate. We have hyperventilating. We have muscle tension. We have sweating / difficulty regulating our body temperature. We have headaches. We have migraines. We have upset stomach, and again, quite a few other hosts of digestive issues that we talked about, like constipation, diarrhea, chronic inflammation of your intestines as well, and your stomach lining. We have acid reflux, which again, if you have a constant level of too much acid, it is going to unfortunately burn away at the lining of your stomach, leading to some very painful, stomach ulcers and even hernias sometimes. Again, just all linked back to that inflammation in certain areas. And again, it can develop after that physical trauma if you did have physical damage to your body following that traumatic event. We have chronic pain and chronic fatigue as well. This isn't necessarily on the physical impact of trauma, but we very frequently, along with PTSD, which is what we develop after a traumatic event, some of us, we very frequently will have other mental health conditions that have a direct impact on our physical health, like at the very base level, depression and anxiety. Anxiety is going to mimic those stress responses within your body. If you are someone who has depression as well, you can have either or both, you know. If you have depression, again, we're talking about that isolation. We're talking about having little to no energy. We're talking about not engaging socially. All of these things have a direct physical impact on your bodily health. And then again, to name off more so you guys can do some additional research for yourself if this topic is interesting to you. We have some stress hormones in the form of cortisol, norepinephrine, and adrenaline. And then we did kind of focus on cortisol because that's where we have a lot of studies. But again, I can discuss adrenaline and norepinephrine if you guys want. And then the opposite of what we're tending to miss as a result of not socializing, not doing preferred activities to incite love and joy, is serotonin, dopamine, and our endorphins. So that is me all wrapped up for the physical side of things. I will open the floor to some questions. I would like to highlight just two sources for you guys if you want to immediately jump to research this after our talk. But there is a wonderful, wonderful TED Talk done by Dr. Nadine Burke-Harris, and it's titled How Childhood Trauma Affects Health Across a Lifetime. And what she discusses in this TED Talk is one, her own clinical experience and how understanding the physical effects of childhood trauma has, really impacted her practice and her as an individual as well. But she also references a hallmark study that we use, which is called the ACEs study. It was done by Kaiser Permanente and the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control. And this is called the Adverse Childhood Experiences Study, or the ACEs study. Very, very, very easy very easy to ingest, to absorb. I was struggling between inabsorb or insorb. I don't know what was going on there. ADHD, guys. Yes, thank you, Catherine. Silly. Anyone who's my regular knows, guys, the thoughts are constantly buzzing in my head, but in eventually they do tend to come out. It just tends to get jumbled sometimes. But yeah, so that Dr. Nadine Burke-Harris TED Talk, and then the ACEs study. And the ACEs study has gone on to well and truly influence so many other studies. There have been so many iterations of it in countries across the world. And again, it's ACEs linking to adverse childhood experiences. So knowing that information, please understand too that simply because you have these experiences in childhood, it does not exclude you from understanding those impacts that they talk about if you didn't experience it in childhood. If you experienced it later on in life, your symptoms are just as valid, your experiences are just as valid, and they will have very similar effects on your body as well. So with all of that in mind, I'll go ahead and close off the presentation section. I already see some hands. So yeah, Charm, please go for it.
Good night, everyone. I was just curious. I wanted to know if you experienced childhood trauma when you were younger, if you were given the help to cope, like therapy and things like that, to kind of combat that, would the trajectory of your adult years have changed if there was somebody in your life to, recognize that you had trauma and find ways to deal with that through therapy and things like that.
Yeah, absolutely, Charm, it does. And I think that's a wonderful, wonderful question to start us off, because I can really lean into those other demographics as well, because absolutely mental health services should be at the first and foremost whenever we have anyone, child, adolescent, teen, adult, elderly, whoever has experienced trauma, whatever stage of their life they are in, they need, and again, in my country, in my opinion, in this country, I wish that it was something that was subsidized by the government, because we experience trauma, again, as that study suggested, as those statistics suggested, over 90% or about 90% of us are going to experience at least one traumatic event in our lifetime. So if we can get mental health services quickly following the event as a way to support, to validate, and mainly to destigmatize and stop, if we can, the development of guilt and shame. Because many, many people in many different facets have survivor's guilt. They have shame if they have experienced sexual assault or childhood abuse, because that may have been instilled from a very, very young age. Additionally, though, and thank you again for bringing this up, Charm, we have to think about things like the socioeconomic influence. If you are coming from an area that does not have a lot of resources, if you are living below the poverty line, your access to certain resources are going to be limited. Additionally, we need to think about gender. We need to think about race. As we know, in this country, there are constant, disgusting attacks on people of color. If you want to add in all of that as well, we can have a disproportionate effect of women of color and trans women of color too. And again, I bring that up because we have had so many movements. We've had the Black Lives Matter movement. We have had the reproductive rights movement. We have seen so much Asian American hate during COVID and attacks. All of those things contribute to our ability to heal from trauma. So, to answer your question again in a succinct way, Charm, yes, there absolutely is a positive trajectory later in life for individuals who have experienced childhood trauma. And mental health services are a huge, huge part of that. But as you were healing, as you were going on that healing journey, and as you were seeing others on your healing journey, we have to be aware that it can't just stop at mental health services. We need to extend to the community, we need to extend to the state, and we need to extend to the country level as well, because all of those things impact. And as I said, other things too, like your diet, your exercise, hobbies even. It has to be a holistic approach, or an approach on all levels: mind, spirit, body, emotions, however you want to phrase it. We have to think about all of it. So thank you so much for allowing me to talk about that, because I am very, very passionate about that. And while I'm here, fuck the prison industrial complex, because it doesn't help anyone at all. And Lisa, I see your hand. Go for it.
Wow.
Hey, I'm wondering, when all of these physical things are triggered, and like they seem to happen all at once, is this like a pain throughout the body, or like a rush throughout the body, and then collapse, and then not remembering exactly the 2 days after? Is that a trauma response? Is that something like that?
So I'm going to try to answer, and please again, Lisa, as always, if I'm not answering your question, please like correct me and be like, hey, Bella, stop. That's not what I was asking, because that's completely fine.
Okay.
For our physical trauma response, your brain firing and signaling to your nervous system to dispense those hormones is absolutely a very, very quick process, for sure.
Okay.
However, what you may be feeling can happen over a matter of minutes with that adrenaline kicking in. It may happen in, 30 seconds if it happens very quickly. You will
Mhm.
feel the effects of that adrenaline, that norepinephrine, and that cortisol very quickly. However, that does not directly link to physical pain. What
Mm.
you will feel is your muscles tightening, increasing that tension. If you think about it like a spring, it's
Mm.
condensing that spring, tightening, 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 so that whenever it's ready to run or whenever you need to fight or you need to flee, however your nervous system reacts, that you are ready to literally spring, bounce back. Heart rate racing, your breath rate is going to increase. And the physical pain that you may feel afterwards, and let's say in this example that you did not suffer physical damage to your body, you may feel chronic fatigue and pain afterwards, because if you were not someone who put your body under consistent levels of stress, like long-term exercise, marathons, things that I was talking about before,
Mhm.
your body's not used to that. So you will
Right.
feel that soreness, you will feel that pain following. But those long-term effects that I discussed, kind of like that immune system, that's usually happening over weeks or months of prolonged body stress or prolonged exposure to stress as a result of the traumatic event. You will probably feel the digestive effects pretty immediate, either
Yes.
immediately before the traumatic event or immediately afterwards. And again, those may come up very quickly in the following days because your body was way out of whack. And again, if that digestive system slows down to a total stop, you
Mhm.
may be constipated for days following. So sometimes it is normal to have to go into the doctor to have that helped, either with the use of enemas or many other things to kind of get that digestive system flowing again. Was
Mhm.
that helpful?
Yeah. But I had I collapsed right after
Can
the
you broke up
rush.
just a little bit, Lisa? Would you mind repeating
Oh,
that
I'm
last
sorry.
bit?
I collapsed after
Mhm.
the initial rush, and
Mhm.
then I couldn't remember for a couple of days. It's spotty, my memory.
Yeah.
Uh,
So what I would say, Lisa, for that fainting, very much a physical response. Again, it's in response to that fatigue. Your
okay.
body was under insane amount of stress, not something that it would be used to. And so your body was like, all right, we're safe. We're safe enough.
Right.
Absolutely not. We're piecing out. We're going to sleep. However,
Okay.
that memory, yes, it can be linked to the physical process because when cortisol floods our hippocampus, which is our main memory center, it does affect the hippocampus. But additionally, you have the psychological element, which is where our brain will block certain memories of trauma.
Okay.
So,
Yeah.
yeah, no problem, Lisa. I hope that
Thank
helps.
you so much. Yeah, I did. Thanks.
Of course. And Phil, I see your hand. Please go for it.
Can this also cause liver failure, or has liver failure ever been associated with trauma?
So, to be honest, Phil, I don't have that question on hand. What I can say for certain, though, is that addiction is very, very, very common after trauma. And again, it can be as a way to try to help the short term and help that hurt. Or it can be in the search of dopamine, it can be an escapism. And as we all know, prolonged use of alcohol and some other substances as well can lead to liver function and liver failure. And in the same way, our liver is what gets rid of all of those toxins. So if we are eating a lot of processed foods and things that are not good for our digestive system or our health overall, we can develop a lot of additional problems within our body. I can't think off of the top of my head directly linking to trauma and maybe a hormone and inflammation response. But again, it is kind of chronic inflammation that is at the root of things like arthritis, that is the root of things like IBS, the root of fibromyalgia. And that liver inflammation very well could be. I just don't have a certain answer for you right off the top of my head. But if you message me, I'll do my very best to research it and we can think on that together. And Rachel, I see your hand. Please go for it.
Yeah, so this was just like echoing the earlier question about like if in childhood people get, mental health help right away, does that mitigate some of those things? And I guess my question would be like, even in adulthood, if someone ends up getting treatment for childhood trauma and those neural pathways are really ingrained and the physical symptoms have been present for a long time, do people find that some of those like somatic symptoms decrease or mitigated as a result of coping with childhood trauma from like a somatic place and releasing those things?
Yeah, in my experience, and again, I will speak from my personal experience for sure, and from my professional experience and what I have observed through research from other people who've been in the field longer than I have. Absolutely, they do have those long-term somatic effects. And again, just in case you're not familiar with somatics, that is, let's say at the base level, body sensations. So if I were to say somatic experiencing, that is experiencing sensations within my body, just in case you aren't familiar with those terms. But whenever we have childhood trauma, and again, whenever we have even trauma in adulthood, we very frequently can have those linkages to flashbacks, which can present those somatic experiences. We can have, when those flashbacks occur, it can present as very real pain. It can present in very real pain, either in your chest, the area that you sustained trauma in. It can present as stomach pains. Some people describe it as a stabbing, like a stabbing pain, even if they were not, quite literally stabbed with an object. It can still feel that way. You can have nerve pain if you are having damage to anywhere in your body, but particularly your hands and feet, because we use them so frequently. They may not have the very best opportunity to heal. And so as a result, you might have prolonged damage to those nerves. All of those link back to the resources, again, that you get immediately following the trauma. Because again, in my experience, Rachel, and I would really like to hear your thoughts as well on this, Anna. In my experience, it's very frequently whenever we have a traumatic event, the longer that we go not validating and really seeing that person who has experienced the event, the longer that they go persisting with thoughts of guilt, thoughts of shame, pressure from external society, perhaps their family, all of those experiences are going to get worse, both the psychological and the physical ones. And the longer that they have to affect the brain and the body, the harder they are going to be to combat. And that is why we have more invasive treatments. Previously we may have used electroshock therapy. Now we can use that in a much, much easier and more gentle way, such as using TENS machines. Additionally, we have things like acupuncture as well to help heal that somatic experiences. We have psychedelic therapy, in the form of ketamine and psilocybin or magic mushrooms, most recently as a way to literally restructure and rewire the brain's response to trauma. And additionally, we have therapies like EMDR to allow us to revisit that trauma, but to help heal our body's response to addressing that trauma and how our bodies respond to that trauma. Anna, is there anything that you might be able to add from Rachel's question?
No, I just want to validate everything that you said. It absolutely, the longer we go without, an intervention, the worse that it will get. And I think the one thing though is that so many of us are so used to living in this constant state
Mm.
of, whether it's the four stress responses and we're in our primitive brain and we're in the fight, flight, freeze, or fawn, that it becomes such a way of life we don't recognize and we don't connect it to our physical illnesses, you know, um, our isolation, all of these, depression, whatnot. We don't necessarily make that connection. And so therefore it prolongs us sometimes from getting help. And it can, I know Phil had asked this earlier in the chat. We didn't even get a chance. You guys have blown up the chat tonight. You guys, we have like 50 people in this room tonight. It's off the chain. It's amazing. But Phil had asked, if this, what's the average, how long will this cut our lifespan off,
Mm.
if, and to me, if we're not treated, and of course, if the more ACEs, which are, as you had said, Bella, the, abusive types of situations that we're exposed to as children, the more ACEs we have, the more it affects our lifespan. And it can be up to 20 years taken off our lifespans if we're not, finding interventions and dealing with some of this stuff. And I know, and it doesn't mean you guys, I don't want people to go to bed thinking that this is it. It doesn't mean that it's going to, and that this is going to, we're all going to be statistics of this, but we do have to deal in reality, that, it can affect us. And so therefore, getting the shame, shining the light on the shame hides in the dark, you guys,
Mm-hmm.
shining the light on the shame, bringing it to the surface and really, taking this healing journey and whatever that looks like to you is going to be so important for all of us, in our physical and mental wellness, our medical wellness. So I just want to, just really, really, um, you know, validate everything that you just said, Bella. It's true.
Thank you so much, Anna. I really do appreciate that. I also know, guys, I know, Anna, we've got about 1 minute left in the room. So I see that I'll think I'll take like one more question if that's okay. And of course, like
Yep.
Donald and Kelly D, like please feel free to send me a message. As I said, it doesn't bother me at all. And if again, you would like to hop off, Anna, keep that boundary. I respect that. And then I'll probably hop off after Kelly's question then. And Kelly, please go for it.
Oh, you know what? Since you guys need a close group, I can message you about it. I was just going to ask you about once you said the ECT and then you said the TENS unit, because I have a TENS unit at home and they don't want to pay for my ECT. So I
Yeah.
was just,
Of
yeah.
course not. No.
But
You guys,
anyway, thank you for
thank
the
you for
group.
that. I mean, God, this is Bella, I wish we had another hour.
I know, I
I
know.
think that you're probably gonna have to come back. I'm gonna vote for you coming back. So, I'm like, because it's such a great topic and it's a tough topic, but it's so needed. You guys, this conversation is needed. I know Bella does classes during the week. Check out her classes during the week. There'll be a childhood trauma group tomorrow morning at 11. We can unpack some of these thoughts here too. You guys, anybody who wants to share from tonight, we can carry this over to tomorrow. And but for me, you guys, I'm sending you all kinds of love and comfort. We're all on this healing journey together. That's what we're here for. And, you know, you can do this work. We can do hard things, as Brene Brown always says. So, you guys, much love to you. I will see some of you tomorrow. Bella, you're amazing. Thank you. Please come back. Please consider coming back and joining us.
Of course, of course. I absolutely
Good night,
will.
you guys. Mwah. Big hugs.
Big hearts. Thank you, Anna.
Good night.
Good night. All right. Oh my goodness. Okay. All
Thank
right,
you so
guys.
much.
No problem, Lisa. And again, as much as, and again, too, please check out Anna's groups on childhood trauma. She's absolutely wonderful. She's a lovely light in this universe. My childhood trauma groups are on Fridays. It's at 4 p.m. or sorry, at 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And again, just to reiterate and to close us out with a message of hope and love and understanding. As Anna was saying, this is not designed to scare you. This is not designed to give you anything but more information about how this may affect your body. And additionally, too, our bodies are resilient. Our brains are so unbelievably resilient. Yes, you may have suffered physical and emotional trauma, but that does not mean, as Anna was saying, that you have that immediate cutoff of 20 years from your life. Absolutely not. The more we have education resources like this, you can have more informed discussions with those people in your mental health care, in that physical team that may be helping you, like your physical therapist or your primary care physician, and being like, hey, you know what? I think I am suffering from some prolonged high levels of cortisol, and I'm really feeling the physical effects of that. How would you, as my physician, help me with that? What are some of the things that I can do at home? How you approach your healing journey is going to be the test of how much you are able to adapt. How you approach your mindset and how you look at the world of trauma, how you look at yourself. If you minimize and push away and invalidate yourself, you're going to be adding, unfortunately, a lot more weight to an already very heavy load to bear. But again, if you talk about it, if you are open, if you do your very best to share your story, educate yourself, because educated people are empowered people, as I always say, you are going to be armed with so many things that are going to act like armor and are going to act like a shield to help with these things. For every negative factor that is associated with trauma, I can think of 3 that are mitigating factors. The people who love you, they all count as mitigating factors. Those senses of community that you find in, your soccer club, in your church, in your book club. You don't have to go into your trauma with them. Simply being around them, generating those endorphins, generating that dopamine, you are giving your body and your brain a fighting chance that it may not have had. And sometimes it can be as simple as a FaceTime or a text message if those in-person visits feel like too much. Go at your pace. Understand that yes, this is going to have an impact on you, but also understand that this is not the end of the road and you are absolutely not alone on this journey. A lot of people, and again, I'll close out very quickly here, but a lot of people, much like Anna, ask me, like, why are childhood trauma groups your favorite? Why is grief your favorite? Because, hey, childhood trauma and trauma in general go hand in hand with grief. They are my favorite because people who have experienced trauma, people who have experienced grief, they view the world in a whole way. They see both the light and the dark, and because of that, They are able to empathize with individuals who are living in the dark currently. They have that love and that understanding that the people who have never faced hardship in their life push away minorities. They push away someone who has different gender expression. They push away people who are of a different religion than them. Because it's easy, because they don't have that empathy. And again, I know a lot of people don't want to get political, but I am, and I'm not afraid of it because all of that is based on fear. All of that hatred can be based on fear and lack of understanding. But if we remember that all of us are just humans and we all have these physical and emotional responses to the trauma of life, man, what a wonderful world we could have. What a wonderful, loving, and understanding world that we could have if we just understood how our bodies are affected by the difficult things that we experience in this life. So that is me finished. It has been such a pleasure to see so many of my regulars here, and to everyone who is new and I'm seeing for the first time, thank you so much for stopping in. Every single one of you is going to be leaving, hopefully, with at least one tiny kernel of information that you didn't have coming in. And my only request to you is if this ever comes up, please share it. Please add on to that wonderful message of destigmatizing and normalizing mental health. And if you are in a position to do so, share your story if you can. And even if you don't want to share your story, become an advocate. Because we need more of you lovely people in this world. We need more people who have experienced the light in the dark. You are what is beautiful in this world. And because of your experiences, you are capable of seeing the world in a very different way. I value it, and I know that other people will value it too. So thank you so much from the bottom of my heart. You've given me a wonderful opportunity to talk about things that I am intensely passionate about. And I look forward to seeing all of you very, very soon. And you are welcome to reach out to me anytime. So talk soon. And thank you again.
Thank you, Bella. That was amazing.
Yeah, thanks,
Thank you,
Bella.
Spirit. Thank you, guys. Thank you, Peaceful Butterfly.
Thank you, Bella.
Bye.
Thank
Have
you,
a good night.
Kelly. Bye
Thank you for all your
bye.
support.
See you
Thanks,
soon.
thanks,
Thanks,
Bella.
Bella.
Thanks,
And I
Donald.
am
Thanks,
Bella,
Barbs.
Bella.
Bella.
Ella,
Thank you,
Ella.
Clarita.